Hello friends, welcome to today's session. I'm CA Renu Srikanth Tantry here. Today I'm going to introduce you to the topic of GST. This term GST you would have heard very often in your everyday life. So let's understand what GST is all about. In today's session I'll be just introducing you to the term Goods and Services Tax. In short we call it GST. Now, what do we mean by GST? It is Goods and Services Tax. Now, Goods and Services Tax was actually introduced in the year 2017. Before we understand Goods and Service Tax, first let us understand what was the situation before this Goods and Service Tax or GST was introduced. Before this GST was introduced, there were several taxes which were to be paid by the businesses on the supply of goods or on rendering of services. Like they had value added tax, VAT, central sales tax, then there was excise, there was service tax. Like this, there were several taxes which had to be paid on the different items and different types of supply of goods and services. And also these taxes had their own compliance requirement. So there were array or basket of taxes which were there, which had to be tackled with by the taxpayer. But slowly, as the time went, they thought, why not have one comprehensive tax instead of having so many taxes? So that is how GST was introduced, with the intention of having one nation, one tax. So there is going to be a simplification of the tax system by the introduction of GST, that only one tax, that is Goods and Services Tax, has to be paid by all the business, and there is going to be only one act, one tax related to which compliance has to be done by the taxpayer. Now, before we go into further about the Goods and Service Tax, first you need to know about tax in itself. Tax are of two types. One is called as direct tax, the other one is indirect tax. Now, let us understand what is direct tax and indirect tax. Direct tax means a tax which is levied directly. It is levied on the particular person who is earning that income. A very good example would be the tax levied on salary. So on the salary which a person earns, he pays tax on it. So directly the person who is earning that income is being taxed here. So this tax on the income, that is salary, is called as direct tax. Therefore, this direct tax is income based tax, and it is governed by authority called as CBDT, Central Board of Direct Taxes. Now, we will understand what is indirect tax. From the term only know it is levied indirectly, which means here it is levied on the supply of either goods or of services. Therefore, like on the goods that is being purchased or services that are being availed, on that tax is levied. This is consumption based tax, which means it is on the person, ultimate consumer, who is consuming the goods. The burden of paying tax is actually falling on the consumer. The other people who are there in the process, like the businesses, they are just collecting the tax from the consumer and passing it on to the government. So this basic difference you need to know before you understand GST. I hope that is clear. Now moving on, we will go to GST now. Goods and Services Tax, GST. What is GST? In short, GST is an indirect tax which is levied at a prescribed rate on supply of goods and or services or both, and it is registered, it is levied or paid by the registered taxpayer. So that is GST in short. Now let us understand each one of these 4 points in detail. First point is that it is an indirect tax. And I have already explained what is indirect tax. Indirect tax, the tax burden, it falls not on the person who is levying it and collecting it, but on the ultimate consumer. So person who is consuming the goods, like you and me, who purchase the goods ultimately and use it for own consumption, are the people who are actually paying the GST. The other parties, that is the business who is billing us, they are just collecting from us and they are transferring it off to the government. So that is how it is an indirect tax. Then it is levied at prescribed rate. Now GST is administered by a GST council, and under the GST Act they have prescribed different rates for different types of goods and services. There are different rates: 0%, 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%. So some goods fall under 0 category, some under 5%, some under 12%, some fall under 18% and some fall under 28% GST category. So that would be the rate. You will have to find out under which category the goods dealt with is falling, and that particular rate of GST would be levied while billing. So that is how GST is levied at the prescribed rate. For further detail, there are different types of GST, like in case of intrastate, interstate, that we will be dealing with much later in the upcoming videos. Now further, the next point was on supply of goods and or services or both. So when there is a supply of goods, GST is going to be levied. When there is supply of service, GST is levied. Or when there is supply of goods and services together in a particular supply, like when there is catering service being provided, food is also provided and service is also provided by serving the people there. So that type of thing, all these are covered under GST. Now, when there is a supply of goods, for general, let us understand. Like the manufacturer manufactures a product X. Suppose it is in the 18% category of GST. What the manufacturer does is when he sells it, he will levy this 18% GST and collect it from the wholesaler. So he collects it from the wholesaler, wholesaler pays that 18% GST. Then the wholesaler would add his profit margin and then he will sell it to the retailer. At that time again, he will be levying 18% GST, he will be collecting from the retailer on the supply that the wholesaler is making to the retailer. So retailer pays 18% GST on the price which is paying to the wholesaler. And then finally the retailer will add his own profit margin to that product and then sell it or supply it to the consumer and levy again 18% GST. So ultimately consumer who consumes it, he is paying the GST. He has nobody else to transfer it, so it is consumption based tax. He is the person who is actually bearing the burden of the tax. So when there is a supply, you see this is how the tax liability is getting transferred. So from the consumer, amount is collected and the retailer, whatever he paid to the wholesaler, he will use it to set off whatever he has collected. Net amount he would pay to the government. So that set off part also we will be dealing with separately in a set off topic in my upcoming video. So this is how GST is levied at different stages. So on supply of goods, this is how the tax is levied and collected. So whether it's supply of goods or services or both, all of these are covered under GST. And finally, this last thing about GST is levied by the registered taxpayer. Registered taxpayers means here it includes the person or as a supplier or the seller, whoever is supplying the goods or who is rendering the service. So this is a person who is to register under GST. Now you might ask whether every supplier or seller has to register himself under GST. The answer is no. When the turnover exceeds the prescribed limits, there are certain limits which are prescribed under the Act. So when the turnover of that particular supplier or seller exceeds that prescribed limit, then he has to register with under the GST and get a GSTIN number. Now the limit is 40 lakhs of turnover. So when the turnover exceeds 40 lakh, he has to register himself under GST and get a GST number for himself, and then start collecting GST and pay it to the government. Now this prescribed limit has to be referred from time to time. So far it has been 40 lakhs. Further, you might ask whether a person can voluntarily register. Yes, that is also allowed. If a person feels that his turnover is likely to exceed, then he might even register himself voluntarily. Even before his turnover limit does not exceed still 40 lakhs, still he can voluntarily register himself under GST and get a GST number as well. So that is also possible. And one more important point that you need to know is that in case nowadays with the pandemic also, you have seen that most of the sales are happening online. We are all ordering everything online. So in such cases, any person who is a supplier or seller of goods, if he is selling online, even if the sale is for 1 rupee also, even if the sale or supply is for 1 rupee also, then he is required to register himself under GST. So there the turnover limit will not be applicable. Even if he sells for 1 rupee, he is required to register under GST. So this is about registered taxpayer. He has a responsibility of levying that particular prescribed rate. He has to apply on the value of the goods that is supplying and collect it from the consumer to whom he is supplying, and then he has to pay it over to the government. That is the responsibility of the registered taxpayer. So with this, I think you would have got a general idea of what GST is all about. With this, we come to the end of today's session. So stay tuned for further session for deeper understanding of GST and the related topics like the set-off and the different types of GST levied when the sale is an interstate sale or when it is a intrastate sale, the different types of GST that are levied and so on. So if you found this video useful, please do like, share and subscribe to it. And please don't forget to click the bell icon to get continued notification of my upcoming videos. Thank you. Have a great day.